Commission on September 17th, 2024. Due to the Senate weather, we've got some possibility that we'll have a couple of commissioners participate remotely. I would like to begin by calling the roll to determine a quorum. Commissioner Clark, Commissioner Condo is present. Dr. Denard, present. Commissioner Dixon, I know has, I believe I see him there. Yes.
Yep. Hey, everybody.
Good to see you, sir.
And sorry I'm not there. We had a lot of water on our roads.
Yeah. It's unfortunately it's everywhere, it seems. I don't believe there's any drive left in Carolina after the last 6 weeks. And may it be noted that Commissioner Clark is here.
Yes, sir. Good morning.
Yes, sir. Commissioner Groom.
Here, present.
Is present. Commissioner Johnson has indicated she may be a bit late, possibly as late as 11 a.m. to get to the meeting. Commissioner Lee, I have not heard from her, Dr. Lee. Commissioner Phillips is here. Commissioner Reynolds is not here due to illness. Possibility he would join also remotely, but fortunately he came down with an ear infection. Commissioner Snowden is here, and David Ruffin. Dr. Bryan is not here. I have not heard any plans from Dr. Bryan in terms, of course, she's our emeritus member of our commission. So we do have a quorum. I would also like to begin the meeting as always with in the fact that the agenda was published as appropriate 10 days prior to the meeting. If there are any conflicts of interest by commissioners on any items on the agenda that we will be discussing today, do I hear any concern about conflicts of interest? Hearing none, we will proceed to the next item, which is the approval of the North Carolina Historical Commission meetings from the June 18th 24 meeting, which was virtual. You have those also in front of you. Do I hear any discussion, comments, or questions, corrections? I have told Parker that I would, it's just a labeling issue. I think the subtitle of the minutes said the conference call minutes. I'd like to make sure that's deemed as an official quarterly meeting, that it wasn't a special conference call. But other than that, I didn't see anything to merit a correction on the minutes.
I make a motion, we accept the minutes.
With that
correction.
Okay, thank you. Second, Commissioner Snowden has moved. Commissioner Denard has seconded. Do I see with the right hand approval of the minutes? Any objection? So moved. Okay, the next item, of course, was the sad passing of Millie Barbie, a longtime, frankly, servant of this commission and leader of this commission for so many years, and in so many other aspects of North Carolina history. In terms of honoring her, it was the position of this commission in the June meeting to designate a resolution, and Commissioner Snowden has been kind enough to draft that, and I'll hand the floor over to you guys.
Well, you have it in your hands, and I hope you, there's no way I could have listed all the things that Millie did for the state. So I tried, and some of them I just tried to put them as a group. If you have any correction or anything that you would like to change. Mr. Denard, Dr. Denard, I see you have something written there. So.
Yes, just a few, I was going to ask if you would accept a few friendly edits. The first paragraph, I think we need probably a semicolon there after community. And then on the second paragraph, and it be further, and be it further
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so you change that. And then on the last page, be it resolved that the original copy
Okay.
of this resolution,
All
I
right.
think that's what you want to say. Okay, that's all.
That's all corrections. Is there any other comments?
Very kind thing to do, doing that.
Very good. Okay, do I hear any further discussion? Or do I hear a motion?
I move to accept we passed the, resolution subject to the corrections that, Dr. Bernard has made.
Commissioner Phillips says so moved, subject to the suggested corrections of Dr. Denard. Do I hear a second?
A second.
Commissioner Groom has seconded. All in favor of the resolution honoring Millie Barbie, so indicate with your right hand. All objecting, I see none. It is approved. Again, thank you, Commissioner Snowden, for putting that to writing and making that part of our record. We'll then move to the deaccessions from state archives, and I believe Sarah Kuntz, our state archivist, will be presenting that.
Mayor, members of the commission, the waters, I sent you all 3 deaccessions. 2 of them were state agency records. They are fairly straightforward. Those are both series that the agency, the Department of Public Instruction, Department of Transportation concur with. Those are records that we had accessioned some and some have not been accessioned, and they agree that upon reflection and review of the records, they're not archivable. So the unaccessioned ones are already going to be destroyed, but the deaccession ones, we want permission to deaccession those. But the third one, I wanted to make sure we had time for any conversation. This is a very large private collection called the Valentiner Papers. So a little backstory on Dr. Valentiner. He was a world-renowned art historian. He, from the 1920s to the 1940s, was at the Detroit Institute of Art. And then he was in Los Angeles for about 10 years before coming to be the first director of the Museum of Art. The vast majority of that collection has nothing to do with North Carolina. It's background and his art research and diaries of his and things like that before his time here. So we have removed anything related to his time as the director, or in addition to that, they did a exhibit in his memory when he passed from that collection and transferred it to the state agency records of the Museum of Art. And the rest that remains, frankly, we don't even know how to describe it or do it justice. It doesn't get reference. So our private collections archivist had done a lot of discussions with the Museum of Art and the Smithsonian and the Detroit Institute of Art, and determined that the Detroit Institute of Art was the one that wanted it. They already have a huge collection of his. Smithsonian doesn't want it. They said they couldn't take it. It's a lot. We're sitting in like 56 boxes. But they all agree it's valuable for art historians, not for archives in North Carolina. We don't even know how to reference it, but a lot of the pictures are even of artworks that didn't survive World War II. So they're kind of invaluable collections. But we can't even begin. We've had a couple reference questions that we didn't even know how to answer because we don't know what we're looking at there. So anybody have any questions on any of those? That's
Just a comment that I love that it's going to a place where they're going to be able to use it.
yeah, and they have the most of his papers, and he was there for a long time, so we felt like that was a good fit.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
The Museum of Art declined to take the whole thing, so they couldn't take the whole collection. It had actually come to us via the Museum of Art. They got it in his hearing. We built it in his library, and then they gave it to the archives in the 70s. So
Yeah, it's about time we move it on.
it takes up a lot of space. Any other questions about any of the deaccessions?
I just want to say, I want to thank Sarah for the work that she and her team have done on this. Yeah, if you knew the backstory of us working through this process with our colleagues at the Art Museum, it's been quite a bit of work. So, and Sarah has been very patient working through it. So I just want to publicly acknowledge.
We wanted to make sure that since the collection was willed to the Museum of Art, that there was any sort of legal role that they played in the deaccessioning process and keeping them informed. But it's really the work of Colin Reeve, our private collections archivist. He had done all the deaccession work for the state agency records before he got that job. He does a fabulous job of doing very, very detailed research on things before we review it.
Well, we've certainly mentioned this several times before because it's an easy approach to this, looking at it as a clerical process that you just submitted for technical acceptance or non-acceptance, but the degree of time and effort that is made by staff on so much, even reading through the proposed accessions, it's just an absolute remarkable degree of time and effort that's being put in by staff, and it never should be not stated in terms of our appreciation. So, do I hear any discussion further on the proposed deaccessions from state archives? If not, do I hear a motion?
So moved.
Commissioner Condell has so moved. Do I hear a second? Commissioner Clark has seconded. All in favor of the proposed deaccessions, so indicate. All opposed? The ayes have it, and they are accepted. I will use the chair's discretion here to change an order here of the agenda due to an obligation that Ms. Kuntz has for another meeting. If she could grant the ability to give her report at this time.
So I thought for my brief time with the report, I gave you the archive one in writing. I think if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer that. I thought I'd just give you some updates about highlights of America 250 commemoration planning and some activities in the verbal report. So a couple of highlights. As of July 2024, we are fully staffed. The General Assembly gave us 4 temporary positions for 2 years, and those have been filled. So they'll be on board for 2 years. And they have taken over management. I know some of you have been to the Halifax event, but we have a little branded Airstream that the department has and little swag that they're giving away, things that people can pick up. So they've taken over management of that, requests for that, and that's been great. And they've also taken over the management of the grants. So that was the other big thing that the General Assembly provided in the biennial budget was a small local grant program. That was $2.1 million total, and that was to be divided $1 million for the counties and $1.2 million for nonprofits or local governments. We've had 1 round of those open, and we had basically 25 counties apply and got their $10,000 grant. And then we had 71 applicants from local groups or nonprofits, and we awarded 50 of those for a total of $888,000. So the full request was 1.3 million. I could have given away all of our money in 1 round, but we have now reopened that for a second round of applications, and they'll be open through November 1st for the community, nonprofits and local governments. We'll probably keep the county grants open. There's no real reason to close those because we'd like to get them to the counties. That's the whole point. So that's gone well. So all of the contracts that we agreed that we would fund those grants are either signed or with the grantee for review at this point. So that's going well. In a couple of program highlights, I believe I've mentioned before that in partnership with Carolina K-12, we had a cohort of teachers from across the state called the Freedom Fellows that were engaging with topics around freedom and the fight for freedom across our timeline of the last 250 years. They have wrapped up their work, and I believe we'll advertise for a second cohort in 2025. That went very well. They all had to do a project at the end for their school, and some of them are also doing work with the department on resources related to education, America 250th. We're also continuing to see requests for a program that we developed with Sonny Kelly. It's called The Ongoing Fight for Freedom. It's a one-man show about the history of African-American veterans from the Revolutionary War up to modern times. And we're creating lesson plans around that. He drew his inspiration from original collections, a lot of them in our collections. So he plays the role of different people across 250 years, and that's been very popular. We're in the process of creating a wayside and a marker guide and creating an online timeline, so just some other resources we're putting online. We've been to several events. We were at Triumph House's Revolutionary War Days, the House and the Horseshoes reenactment, the 250th of the New Bern Resolves was a lot of fun. We were there for that, and First Provincial Congress. And coming up, we're going to have the Airstream at Pioneer Days in Haywood County, and the Scottish Festival in Hillsborough, and the Edenton Tea Party 250th in October. We're looking forward to that. And the Friends of the Archives is also going to sponsor their annual program on the Edenton Tea Party and focus on women and political activism. That'll be November 1st, so I'll make sure you get an invitation for that. Given lots of presentations to certified local government presentations. I've been over to talk to the General Assembly 250th committee about what we've been planning and things like that, and we've been attending national meetings and talking about our plans. We are looking at national initiatives that are coming down the pipe. They have relaunched America's Field Trip again. That was an initiative of the national 250th. North Carolina had 3 first-place winners and 3 second-place winners, so that was pretty impressive. So we're going to be pushing out information because that just relaunched again. And some other things, including looking at what we can do to commemorate the 250th of the founding of the military in 2025. And we just put in a request to the department for some funding for things, a couple things that the team have come up with. I was at a national meeting in DC and I heard one state say that they had commissioned a poem with their poet laureate. And I'm like, yes, I want to do that. So we talked to Jackie Shelton Green and she of course had even bigger, better ideas than just, I'll write you a poem. So we're going to be trying to work with her if we get support from the department to do a community-based poem where she'll actually have like events across the state where she'll take her structure of a poem and then people will have the opportunity in groups to add to it for the commemoration. So that was one thing. And we've also been talking with Arts Council about how we can partner with them in schools on an art initiative related to the 250th. So those are kind of our new ideas. But it gives me the most pleasure to talk about the book series that we've been working on with Ansley's Shop. We're a dangerous pair if you want to keep on our way. So we've been creating, I think, as you know, a series of children's books that 4 are planned. Dr. Johnson's going to be writing one and her sister will illustrate it. But the first one is done and Ansley would like to present it to you. This represents a lot of her hard work with our illustrator and author, and it's just beautiful. It's called Within Our Power, the story of the Tea Party. And Nancy's a great salesperson. She's been shopping around the country for other bookstores and other gift shops that might want to sell this book because not just in North Carolina. So she's been approaching other places.
That is so nice.
The illustrator is just really skilled. Sam, I wish I could give it to you.
Commissioner, yes, Commissioner Dixon, it's definitely Eden.
Yeah, I saw it. We rolled it out at a Eden Historical Commission meeting this morning, and we're just all really so excited and appreciative, but for everything everybody has done for this.
Well deserved.
Say anything about the book?
Well, it's Sheila Barrett Carroll in my office is also should be credited. She designed the book. It's absolutely gorgeous. It's for grades. It's targeted to grades 3 to 5, but I think a parent reading it to a younger child. Oh, in the back of the book is a sheet that will take you to how to buy the book, or how on the other side is the Mosaic NC exhibit that's about the Eaton Tea Party. Colonial Records editor Katie Hatton did a wonderful little exhibit that IDs all the women, talks about the history, how we remember the Eaton Tea Party. It's really informative. So that's kind of there for the adults. But
so we really see these books as a good legacy project. We looked around at the beginning and there were no children's books about North Carolina stories from the period. And so that's the genesis of starting this. And this one really hits a lot of highlights with not only the Edenton story, but it's a women's history story and North Carolina story. So really looking forward to continuing.
we worked with Triumph Palace to get the clothing correct, which I love. They let me go into their costume shop, take a lot of pictures. They let me bring some things back. I did put them on. And they stayed at John's house for a while, and he, the clothing really accurate.
Saying
This lady for the models for we promenaded about the building. I'm not gonna lie to you. But yeah, so the rest of the books that are in this group, the grades 3 to 5, are one about the Red Wolf in colonial North Carolina called Freedom's Howl. The Overmount Men, which is going to be written. We already have a manuscript in hand that Katie Patton, our colonial records editor, has written, and then the Early Patriots, which Dr. Johnson is writing, and her sister is going to draw that one. So it's been a great learning curve of learning how to work with artists, which they're a different breed, but everything that was difficult about this place has been worth it. I hope that it will teach everybody in North Carolina about the Eaton tea learner.
So now we spend our days dreaming of the next topics and the next age group and try to find money for it.
And Mr. Chair, let me again just acknowledge Ansley and her team's work on this. It's, a lot of hard work that's going into it. So Ansley, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you for all the work that you've done on this.
It's beautiful.
Thanks.
It really is.
And
and I
we're
think-
gonna have a bit, yeah, we're gonna have a big parade in October, and I mean, I think that and a series of speakers based around all of this, and so I mean, the people of Edenton are very excited. People are finally recognizing Edenton.
You know, and we'll spend a lot of time with the team here at the NCR helping to promote the Eaton event. We're looking for kind of marquee big things, and so we'll use social media and our media buys and things like that to promote the weekend in Eaton.
And I'm gonna be at the fair on the 20th. May in fact be in costume, to talk about the book and hand out some tote bags that Sarah helped us to buy, some canvas tote bags. And then I spoke yesterday with someone at PBS Kids they're gonna feature this in March for Women's History Month. They will do a little reel in between some of their children's shows.
Yeah, the agency has been partnering with PBS for a variety of their platforms, not just PBS Kids, but broadcasts, newsletters, things like that to promote commemoration activities as well. But are there any questions for me about America 250?
I don't really have a question, but I'm just sensing that at some point, everyone who's inclined should dress up in some of these costumes and go over to the legislature and act in character. Just shake them up a little bit.
They might enjoy that.
Educated.
I think that one of the, we've been working as a commission arguably 18 months, Dr. Waters relative to where the committee sits with Noah Reynolds now, aptly chaired by him. And one of the recurring discussion points we had over those 18 months as commission has been get to children early. That ability to love history is hard to take from a human being if they've been exposed at an early age. And I really think this is a testament to exactly that. And
Well, and the department, bringing out Christy Norris as our education director has been really helpful too, because she's able to amplify all of the ideas that we have. I'm not a teacher. Never taught in the classroom, but she does and has, and can really take our ideas and our products and get them out and tell us how to improve them and find new audiences in the education community. So she's been really helpful.
I have two questions. Just how much of your work goes to the western part of the state? Like you were talking about the getting grants across the state. Do you get many responses from the western part of the state?
It was funny to watch the demographics of that. Yes and no. It depends on where. So like Haywood, McDowell, we've had some. Burke has been pretty active, but Watauga County, I think they must have had a meeting and told every single nonprofit in the county to apply for a grant. I could have given, $500,000 just to Watauga County. So it kind of depends on the network and who's spreading the word, but they got organized and spread it out. So it varies from county to county. I think Ashe County has a grant. So there's some county grants. It's not too bad in that
I
part of
might
the
have to
state.
shake up a few people of Buncombe County. I don't understand why we're not getting more from of this. And then well, how do you connect with people like through these different counties? Like, do you have a media link that connects to the different counties in their government, or?
So, yeah, grant announcements and things like that, we're sending to listservs for county managers and county commissioners type folks.
Listservs.
Right,
So
so
you
like an
get-
email listserv.
Okay.
We've done mailings, but then primarily our contacts are through historical groups or community groups that get organized, and often they're pushing for a county committee. So it kind of depends on the county, but but that's been the most typical model, is that a group or a couple groups of people are interested. And Charlotte is a good example. Mecklenburg County obviously has a lot of historical groups and associations, and someone from the Charlotte Trail of History kind of took it upon herself to get organized, get groups talking to each other, and then lobbied for a county committee that they could kind of centralize their planning work. But we also, I mean, we also will send out information through various contact lists that we have, museums or other groups that we have email lists for,
Right.
so.
I love the Instagram and Facebook
Right.
and things. I always compliment that and I just don't know. I guess that maybe Buncombe doesn't have a big historical network. You know, I can figure.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of takes someone taking the lead to start. The other route that we've taken is through a Ramona's shop with their certified local government training, because often there's an overlap of folks interested in historic preservation and the commemoration. So we've all last year and then this year, when her office is doing training, we're on the agenda. And sometimes we have a couple counties, and I understand another one might be the case, where the Historic Preservation Commission is also the county 250 commission. Like some counties opt to do that. Some counties have opted to have their parks and recreation entity or their travel and tourism. That's the case in Swan County. Travel and tourism entity can be the official commission.
Who do you suggest I reach out to in Buncombe County? A particular, the mayor,
Go ahead, say that.
And Chesney Smith. Right?
Yes.
Chesney Smith.
She is incredible.
That's.
Okay.
Or, I mean, I know he's thinking about retirement, or Jeff Butch might be a good person. He runs the
Yes.
Museum of Partnership
Yeah.
group out there. And I think it just takes a kind of a critical core of people being interested in getting organized.
And I know both of those people. All right. Well, good. Thank you so much. Thank you very much.
And these are for sale from your.
Yes.
Like one now.
There,
Yeah.
that little sheet in the back takes you to the website where you can go buy it. We're hoping to get it in bookstores.
Okay.
And come to Edenton, the
It's
author
an
and illustrator.
$18 list price.
All of our books are sold in units, so one there for our other.
Commissioner Dixon, when is the event in Edenton?
It's
In October.
is it October 27th? We talked about it. I think it's October 27th. Is that right? Or is it the 17th?
25th and 26th.
Okay, yeah. And if anybody needs a place to stay or anything, call me. I'll help arrange it. I mean, I can't make much happen anywhere, but I can make anything happen in Edenton.
Careful what you ask for. We're sending 4 staff that might be bunking in your house.
Yeah, look, we can work that out.
Thank you, everybody.
Great.
You
Thank
can
you very
notice
much.
Sambo's backdrop.
Yeah, you see.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Just for the record,
Hayes.
that's Hayes. That's the library at Hayes.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm gonna turn to Dr. Waters to kind of guide us through the proposed accessions in terms of the order. These, of course, are the proposed accessions to the North Carolina Museum of History, the North Carolina Museum of the Albemarle, the North Carolina Maritime Museums, and the State Historic Sites. Before we proceed on that basis, does anyone or is anyone aware of any asset damage on the coast to any of our museums or any of that? Because as you all probably are aware now, Carolina Beach had 18 inches plus of rain yesterday, which is not far from Fort Fisher.
Chair, and commissioners, I can report that Fort Fisher, in terms of the building, the new visitor center that we're looking to have a ribbon cutting on at the end of this month, the building is intact. It's a brand new build, as you know. One leak has been detected, which is phenomenal for a new build. The earthwork reconstruction has been set back. The earthwork reconstruction has been flooded. There's about a foot of mud inside, and the turf throughout the parking lot will likely have to be resodded. So it could be way worse. Our artifacts are in good stead. And the building is in good stead, and our people are safe because they're here at the Museum of History for our annual meeting.
Right.
Brunswick Town Fort Anderson, the road to and from often floods 133. It is flooding. I may have to close it to the public tomorrow, but, and we'll keep an eye on the building and the artifacts there, but right now things look okay.
Thank you, Michelle. That's been on my mind, for the last 24 hours. And fortunately, this was not a major wind event. It was more rain, as we know.
And I know that roads access to the museum is in Southport. You can't get access to it, so it is closed. But no reports of damage yet. Was just with our deputy director who oversees that museum, and she didn't have any reports of that. Been in constant contact, and I know that they have their own commission, but just for your information, the battleship itself is inaccessible, you know, and this is king tide, so they would have had flooding anyway. So the flooding is, you know, kind of compounded by all of the rain. So they did close yesterday, but currently everyone is safe.
All right, sir.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. So again, you have before you the proposed accessions for the North Carolina History Museum, the North Carolina Museum of the Albemarle, and North Carolina Maritime Museums. And normally you take these all in one suite. And so with your permission, we'll do that again. You have them before you. The internal committee met. These were approved to be forwarded to you for consideration for accessions. And let me see if you have any questions. I'll open it up for that. You know, I always land on something that I like. And I told you, I have John's number here. He's in the meeting. I told him if there are any questions and I need help, I'll call him. But I told him the G.I. Joe. I remember the G.I. Joe. So we both were kind of landed on the G.I. Joe. And so
Just as a comment, I was glad to see the accessions of sports for not only for the women, but also for some of our not as nationally known colleges. I thought that was a very good call on their part.
any other?
I just have one comment about the jersey for Charles Scott, is that even though he was called Charlie Scott by the commentators, he prefers the name Charles, and so I think we should call him Charles.
Call him Charles. Okay, we can change that. Do we know that? Any other?
There was a number of that era, having been at Chapel Hill about that time, that like Don Easter, that I had longtime tennis coach, to have his sweater and some, so that was, I was really,
Stable.
yes. Easterling, you're right, was the swim coach. Right.
Where do these things go, these accessions? Do they get distributed to other museums in our state? Do they find nooks for them in the museum here, or do they?
They're housed in the museums where they're accessioned to, but they can be loaned to other museums across the state or nationally. We're about to loan one of our Thomas Day pieces to the Met in New York, which requested that. And even though the museum staff is really busy with the move and all that's going on, we thought that that was one we needed to work with the Met to do that. That gives our museum some real national attention, but they can be loaned out. There's a process to go through on that, Commissioner Groom. So
And right now, all of the artifacts are being packed up.
yes,
And they're going to stay packed up for 5 years, I understand.
yeah, for at least 3.5, depending on how quickly the construction process
Yes.
moves forward over there. So you'll be seeing in meetings probably a lot of things around deaccessions because they're going through the collection and things that they don't need. So you'll probably see a greater number of those coming before you for consideration as they pack up and go through that process over the next 3 years.
Like cleaning a garage or an attic.
Yes. Any other questions or comments?
I make a motion that we accept the Board of Staff for the accessions.
For the, all four of session, all four, do I hear?
All three, with the exception of historic sites, we'll do that one separately.
I'm sorry,
Yes.
for these will be the North Carolina Museum of History, the North Carolina Museum of the Albemarle, the North Carolina Maritime Museum. So three museums. Do I hear a motion?
Make the motion that we accept.
Commissioner Snowden has moved. Do I hear a
I'll
second?
second it.
Commissioner Denard has seconded. All in favor with the right hand, approve the proposed accessions of these three museums. So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we'll move to the next item for accessions, which is with the North Carolina State Historic Sites and Properties. And Michelle is here. You have those before you. Internal committee met. These were approved to be forwarded to you for consideration. And Michelle knows these well. So if there's any questions, I'm sure she'd be happy to entertain those questions.
Somerset.
Questions? Do I hear a motion to accept the staff recommendations on the proposed accessions to the North Carolina State Historic Sites?
So moved.
I'll second.
Yes, Commissioner Phillips and Condell in that order have moved. Do I hear any other discussion? If so, let's move to approve. All in favor? Aye. All those opposed? You have your approval.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. So we'll move to the proposed deaccessions now. And we'll take the museums in one slate. There are none, well, two museums, North Carolina Museum of History and the North Carolina Maritime Museums. You have those before you. The internal committee has approved these to be moved forward to you all for consideration. So I'll place those before you. Any questions or comments?
For the North Carolina Maritime Museum, you said these two whale bones were in poor condition. Do we have many other whale bones?
We do. We do.
And I also realized y'all have a lot of coverlets. I thought I had a lot.
A lot. Wow.
Any further discussion? If not, do I hear a motion on the proposed deaccessions to the North Carolina Museum of History and the North Carolina Maritime Museums?
Move acceptance of the.
Dr. Denard moves acceptance. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Yes. Commissioner Phillips has seconded. All in favor? So indicate. All opposed? It is approved.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next is the North Carolina Historic Sites and Properties deaccession, proposed deaccessions. These were approved by the internal committee to move forward to you all for consideration. Michelle is here again. If there are any questions, but I'll put those before you and we'll entertain any questions, comments.
What are we looking at now? I'm sorry.
Deaccessions for North Carolina Historic Sites on pages 71 to 81.
Okay, thank you. That helps.
Really, I just have one question, is that we're accessioning a group of greeting cards and then we're deaccessioning a group of greeting cards. I mean, why? Why the difference?
Yes, so the deaccession for this is, we thought this particular collection was better served in a research library. So, and we already have quite a few, it's almost like a duplication.
Okay,
So often what they'll do is get a sense of the rarity of the document, whether or not we have it in a way that could be accessible. Will it ever be on display? That's how each site is determining if or not we the accession or accession. In this case, at BAC, this collection, we thought it would be better in a research library.
so sometimes those kinds of choices seem or obvious to a layperson, you know, a piece of furniture is in better condition or something like that. But those are just kind of like, thank you.
Same thing with I was thinking, saw the same thing about the Lost Colony programs, Had to look at why, this change or that for that.
Any further questions or discussions on the proposed deaccessions of the North Carolina historic sites? If not, do I hear a motion?
I so move.
Commissioner Broom has moved. Do I hear a second?
I second.
Commissioner Snowden has seconded. All in favor of the staff proposed deaccessions of the North Carolina historic sites, so indicate by your right hand. No indication of objection, so moved and so approved.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Back over to you.
Yes, the next order on the agenda is the request by the Daughters of the American Revolution for a marker placement at the James K. Polk State Historic Site.
Mr. Chair, I will recognize our Division Director, Michelle Lanier, to walk us through this.
You have before you, I'm gonna pull mine up. I think a very modest and simple, proposal. Excuse me. Yep. And this is related to a specific Revolutionary War soldier. Ezra Alexander, you'll note that he was captain of a North Carolina militia. He was born in Maryland, actually, but he died on July 6, 1800 in Mecklenburg County. We went back and forth with this particular chapter of DAR because, frankly, their name references the Mecklenburg Declaration of Independence, and their original draft of this marker had reference to the Meg Day. And we told them that that would not stand, that we really needed to kind of de-emphasize that and really put the focus on the soldier. And so they came back to us with a pared down proposal through our Western Regional supervisor, Jeremiah DeJaneiro, who's worked with them for quite a while. We feel comfortable with this version. It still would have to go to the national DAR before it's finally approved, but they needed to know that it was approved at this level first.
Just for my edification on this, Michelle, what was the reason that the need to de-emphasize the reference to the Mecklenburg? I mean, you all probably in this around this table are far more aware than I am, perhaps, but I just would like to.
There's a great deal of debate about the veracity of MECTEC. Some people are very clear about it. Some people there's a passionate discussion, and there's been some really important scholarship. We work with our research branch here to understand how that memory became codified in some communities and challenged in many other communities. And so we want to make sure that if something is questionable in that way, that we don't center it.
Yes.
For the integrity of Polk as a site, but also the Office of Archives and History.
I can speak personally because I am a descendant of John McNitt Alexander, who supposedly was the secretary who signed that document. But as a historian, I have to tell you, it's on shaky ground.
Yeah.
And it has its historians who say it's absolutely happened and et cetera, et cetera. But because there was a fire at the McNitt family home, and the actual documents were destroyed, and it was recreated from memory. And it's very similar to the Mecklenburg Resolves, which we have a copy of, and we can say, did happen. And so historically, what I say is, when I'm in Mecklenburg, I make fun of it. When I'm outside of Mecklenburg, I defend it.
Okay.
So I can argue from either side of the mouth, depending on which side you would like me to take.
I was conflating the resolves and the declaration.
Yeah, there are two different documents.
Yes, thank you.
And Mr. Chair, Ramona and I'll be happy, and Ansley to share with you a synopsis of this that Mike Coffey put together to, kind of walk us through it as a team here. We've been discussing this and how the department will respond to any questions that come up around this, but we'll be happy to supply that to anybody who wants to see it.
And there is a very good article in the North Carolina Historical Review.
It is.
That's what you hand to people when you need to. Ainsley sent me that article, or referred me to that article, so,
And again, kudos to the staff and to the work of the department to differentiate mythology from fact. Too, Commissioner Snowden, a part of that in my family with the mythology around Edmund Ruffin at Fort Sumter. You have to be real careful about what was presumed fact versus mythology, right? So good point.
We do feel good about the fact that we are still honoring the import of memory and how memory can be a really important gathering ground for so many of us. So we are not going to ask them to censor the name of the chapter as they have it indicated here, which I think is a nod to memory. But we will not include it in the actual text. That's where we're threading the needle.
Excellent. Thank you for the time to explain that.
And Mr. Chair, here again, I mean, I just want to take the time, I feel the need to do that, to acknowledge the hard work that the team puts into this. And Michelle's team, they're front line on this, and there's a lot of sensitivity around this and navigating it. And sometimes I feel a little, like I'm passing the buck off, but you're passing it off to very capable people who know how to have those conversations at the community level. So I just want to acknowledge Michelle and her team and the work that they do there to walk.
that is a very sensitive, especially in Mecklenburg.
I guess that's the kind of contested balance you need when you're dealing with contested memory, you can't say one is all this and one is all that. You just have to, when you're in one place, you acknowledge it this way.
That's my joke answer that I've always been, and I do get asked that question. In fact, I got asked that question at the Halifax Resolves, which I thought was interesting.
And Dr. Denard, they're very skilled. Jeremiah, that team, Scott down at Polk, very skilled at walking through those conversations. So, yeah, a lot of thanks to them for that work.
I'm not sure if this requires a vote or just a foundation.
Yes. I think
In other words,
it requires a vote.
yes, okay, so it is a request, and you have presented this in an excellent way to determine or to share with us the additional wordsmithing and navigating that you went through. So at this point, this is the draft you are comfortable with, right? Absolutely. So do I hear any entertainment for motion or further discussion?
I make a motion that we accept their draft.
Commissioner Snowden has moved. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Commissioner Phillips has seconded. All in favor of accepting the draft on the James K. Polk State Historic Site? So indicate. I see any opposition. I see none, so it is approved. Thank you very much, Michelle.
Yeah, thanks for your work on it.
Thank you. People will be very.
So I do not believe this next item would be requiring of any formal vote, but it is a brief report from and presentation of the historical publications.
Yes. So, Ansley.
So, well,
That was folded in with.
Yeah.
right, and mine was mostly giving you the vote.
Okay.
But that,
Sorry.
I think the civil roster project was.
That's carried from Sarah's
Correct.
adjustment of
She
the
wanted to
agenda.
be here when you saw the book,
Of course.
but my staff, from the civil roster project, I think.
Yes.
They would like to
Perfect.
tell you about their work.
Morning, everyone.
Morning.
We'll be taking a few minutes of your time to tell you guys a little bit about the work we do. I'm Carly Beeler.
I'm Chris Meekins. We do thank you for the opportunity. I'll jump right in. The current roster project began in 1961 under the North Carolina Confederate Centennial Commission. Lewis and Joanne Mannering, the roster staff, identified all Confederate service units and all United States service units for inclusion in the project. Over the ensuing 63 years, the roster staff focused on Confederate forces, each new staff team enhancing the series, particularly the essays that accompanied the service records. Acclaimed as the finest state roster ever published and a magnificent achievement, the North Carolina Troops is an invaluable resource for scholars, local historians, genealogists, and Civil War enthusiasts. The first 21 volumes included only 64 African-American individuals, men who performed such duties as cooks, teamsters, ambulance drivers, and other non-combatant roles. Volume 22, published in February of 2024 this year, focused on the Navy, the short-lived State Navy, the Confederate Navy, the Ironclad program in North Carolina, and the Charlotte Naval Yard. Katie Hatton and myself identified 40 African Americans impressed into Confederate service. In addition, there were almost 300 enslaved workers stationed at the Charlotte Naval Yard. The essay in volume 22 engages current historiography in telling the story of the service of North Carolinians, Black and white, in Confederate naval forces. In many instances, the narrative challenges past historiography, offering a new interpretation of events in North Carolina. It also marks a pause on examining the Confederate side of North Carolina service. The current editorial team, Carly and I, have begun the research and documentation of the United States service. The roster project has begun series 2 with an estimated of 5 to 7 volumes.
Okay, so series 2 marks a new era for the roster project in its exploration of United States service, and offers an opportunity to further explore the complex and diverse history of the Civil War in North Carolina. So I'm going to use our current volume, which is on the United States Navy, to kind of break down what this is looking like in terms of highlighting the complexity and diversity of these stories. So we have currently identified 1,295 men from North Carolina who served for the United States Navy. 986 of those sailors are Black men, 678 of whom we can confirm were enslaved immediately prior to enlisting. That means for over half of the sailors we've identified, self-emancipation is integral to their service. Alongside free and emancipated Black men served 307 white North Carolinians. While 108 of those men were Unionists, some with very long naval service, 199 of them were former Confederates who enlisted during the war to leave prisoner of war camps. Furthermore, we have currently identified 1 American Indian man and are continuing to try to identify more. So I break down these stats because each of these men's stories sits alongside of each other. Free Black men, formerly enslaved Black men, former Confederate white men, Unionist white men, and American Indian men. Currently, there are no women in this book, all served on boats together. And together, they illuminate the complex nature of what Civil War service looked like for North Carolina and illustrate the way that the Civil War roster project is now looking to really illustrate the complexity of the stories we have to tell. So as Chris said, the ambition of the roster project has, since its beginning, been to highlight all North Carolinians who served, and we're really grateful to get a chance to share that with you today. And thank you. So does anyone have any questions?
I'm afraid to ask this, but how do you find these people?
Yeah.
I was gonna say, that sounds very difficult.
It's diligent work, that's for sure. So we've gone through all available ships rosters. So looking month by month at, or I guess it's more quarter by quarter, at every man who's reported on a boat and picking out the North Carolina men. And then we follow those men as far as we can. So we actually have a lot of firsthand accounts that these men give in their pension records, that recount, you know, when they served, when they enlisted, what led them to enlist, and so pensions, rendezvous, lots of military records.
We're in a very fortunate digital age where we can do this at our desk or at home if we're working from home. The Bristol Roster Project had an office in the archives in DC. So they work with the records there. But most of the stuff has been scanned it's digitized and we can access it. We do go to local repositories and look for manuscript collections left by individuals that might enhance the story and the stuff that we're doing, so.
That's impressive.
Yeah.
I was gonna ask you, do you have any, do you have any like accounts, and have you run across any accounts of the experience of some of these people?
Yeah, we have a lot of incredible stories that we are going to particularly highlight. One of the things I've found most remarkable is that in reading pension records so detailed, we've uncovered a lot of never told self-emancipation stories from the men themselves. So these are Black voices telling their own stories of not only their Civil War service, but their lives, their marriages, and their self-emancipation.
We found a very few, if you know, there are ex-slave narratives from the WPA project in the 30s, 1930s. We found, I think, at least 2, maybe 3 men who also had that additional, when you can get something in their own voice, telling their own story, it's fantastic. Yeah.
Could you speak a little bit about what comes after the Navy? Because this is a very unique, this is a very unique opportunity, partly with the digitization, but then we're going to go into a whole new realm with the Army and artillery. So if you could talk about that a little bit.
So after the Navy, we'll go into the United States Colored Troops, USCT, and then into the white Unionist Army regiments.
Right, so we got infantry, there'll be some cavalry, there's an artillery unit for the United States Colored Troops. And then there are 2 Eastern units and 2 Western units of white Unionists, 2nd, 3rd Mounted Infantry out west, and the 1st and 2nd Battalion in the east. And their stories are, they're all interesting because they deal a lot with internal struggle, guerrilla warfare, and that sort of stuff. So Shelton Rural out west, and there's a lot of stuff that goes on in the east that's similar to that some has been talked about before, some not. So there'll be a lot of research on these stories. Yeah.
And where can we read these stories?
So they will come out in our next volume, the naval stories. We're also working to add in a digital element because the nature of the roster project is really focused on the war and men's service records. But there's so much, really wonderful details that come out about people's lives. And then also so much really, challenging or tragic detail that comes out of people's lives before and after the war. And we'd love to have a digital component to be able to make like blog post style narratives of these kind of micro histories. And that's something we've had in the works. But other than that, our books are all through UNC Press.
I mean, if she wanted to do a PhD study, she could do that with the social history that's going on that we find in other people's marriages and the interaction with the pension bureau itself over time and what they put these people, the steps they put them through. You can prove a slave marriage, a marriage that was not documented in the first place. And how do you go about proving that sort of stuff? So there's just a wealth of information.
Also, if you could just touch on where we're finding people were recruiting, where the recruitment centers were, some of the buildings, which some of them still are standing, so they're witnesses to this activity, and then how they were represented in communities. And I'm talking about like the Grand Army, the Republic chapters and such as that were all over North Carolina that you don't hear about. You could speak about how they were recruited and then how are they appearing in the community as Union veterans afterwards.
So as you might imagine, wherever the Union Army or Navy went, the people, they were recruiting individuals, particularly the boats. We had the coastal blockade or any boat that went up a river or into the sounds, any place that they touched, they might find individuals who were self-emancipating and looking for their freedom. Then once there were established locations, Roanoke Island, Plymouth, North Carolina, New Bern, Washington, North Carolina, they would then open recruitment centers. As the war progresses, the need for naval vessels grows because they're having to blockade the entire coast of the southern United States. So more vessels means more men. So as they get established in a town like Washington, or Newbern, for instance, Newbern's recruitment center is still standing. So there's that going on. Then post-war, these gentlemen will join the GAR group, Grand Army of the Republic, which was a fraternal group service, and unique, I think, to southeastern Virginia, northeastern North Carolina. The GAR was an open group, so that, you know, lots of people from all ethnicities in them, but there were large chapters in Plymouth County, Pasquotank County, and places in southeast Virginia that had groups that were just, the JR, that was just African Americans. Fletcher Post in Elizabeth City is one I'm most familiar with. So.
And then post-war, you also get, you know, more complicated history. So like we said, a lot of the white men who served in the Navy were former Confederates. And by former, I mean a couple days before they were in a prisoner of war camp and they take oath of allegiance to leave that and join the US Navy. And then we end up finding them post-war, maybe buried under a Confederate gravestone or claiming Confederate service and negating their United States service. So
it's always interesting that individual who drew a pension for the rest of his life and self-identified in census records as a Union soldier or Union sailor, their grandkids come along and slap that Confederate monument up on top of their grave because that they want to celebrate the Confederate service. And so it's interesting when you see this.
See the contrast too, because I felt a little bit, some of the galvanized guys who were switching sides, there are men buried under Union Navy.
of course, yeah.
Of the time period, 19 teens, who wanted to tell people, wanted to send a signal that they.
Yeah, I was just saying, as the contrast to
It's
the
a
GAR,
contrast.
there's, you know, there's both sides and it's a really complicated
Yeah,
history.
their brothers in Randolph County, I found, they're under these naval,
Right.
US naval
Yeah.
gravestones. One
For you to get an idea of the breadth of information that we have to deal with. The last union pension was still being paid as late as 2 or 3 years ago to a dollar out in western North Carolina. So 160 years later, they're still paying a Civil War pension to people. I have seen comments where clerks who had to pay out with like, I've got to pay out a Confederate, how do I pay out a Confederate pension record? Like in the 1960s when they were clerks in the, but yeah, so there were 2 actual living daughters of Union veterans in North Carolina as late as say 4 or 5 years ago.
Gosh.
Yeah. So we are, I always like to think we are the last generation to actually see people who knew Civil War veterans. When you start thinking about how we're losing all of our World War II veterans, almost, I think all the World War I veterans are gone now. What generation is that stops seeing those living people? So we still have immediate contact. As I like to tell my mother, who was born in 1937, her birthday is closer to the Civil War than it is to today. And she just kind of. She loves that.
Any more questions? Yes.
This is a project on the Civil War generally, not North Carolina.
It is a project on the Civil War in North Carolina.
Okay.
So these are all North Carolina men, and then our narrative will has focused on North Carolina throughout all the books and including this one book.
Now, are there activities comparable to this taking place in other states? That you know
The
of?
closest one that I'm aware of is Virginia did a roster series. Their books are about an inch or so thick, but they've got maybe 50 or 60 of them covering all the units. That like we mentioned earlier, it's the finest state roster ever published. You know, there's nothing comparable to it at that level. It's like driving your Ferrari into
Especially with the
Volkswagen
essays,
books.
especially with the essays, the other rosters I'm familiar with are just lists of men, when they enlisted, what happened in them during the war, just a little paragraph even. What we have is much more contextual and tells a fuller story.
The National Park Service also has a database dedicated to Black sailors and soldiers. But it is again, doesn't have the detail that we put.
Chris and Carol, the most recent publication was reviewed, right? Who did the review? I just remember that was published nationally.
That was, his name is Wagenhoff, who did a review for his Civil War blog post. We've also had a review in the latest North Store review by Dr. Jim Brumall. And Chris Fomble, Dr. Fomble's review should be out in maybe the summer of next year. But it's been getting some very nice reviews. Yes. So.
It's amazing. A lot of work.
It's excellent work.
Very much.
It's all for that. It's not easy to find when you don't have marriage records, you don't have wills, you don't have the typical stuff you would find. And I mean, to find the pension records and then the descriptions that are in there of each other and I have to prove who they are. It's amazing.
Yeah, I need stronger reading glasses now than I did when I started.
David Olson, who was the state archivist when I first started taking classes in archives, told us one day in class that for some reason, if you put it on a boat, it becomes sacrosanct and they save everything. And I found out that deck logs, daily reports, the muster rolls, you name it. And sometimes 6 and 7 copies of those things. So,
I have personally read years of the daily reports of the keeper of the Chickamaucomico Life Saving Station. No, it's not just on a boat, it's anything associated with it.
Thank you all for your time and we appreciate your questions and giving us a chance.
Thank you. Excellent.
Wow. Thanks.
That's how Jerry. John and Alexander.
Hi.
You should hear him talk about.
My coffee in my office is ready 20 days before. It's really, it's kind of scathing right here.
Well, we'll take a quick, thank you very much. Excellent. We'll take about a 5 or 10 minute break and then we will see with Ramona on the next item, okay? Just 5 or 10 minute break. make her presentation on the update of the 2025 to 2034 State Historic Preservation Plan.
Thank you, Chair Ruffin. It's delightful always to see everyone and be able to see you. So glad to see you first today. This was included, thanks to Parker, in your packet. It's a lot, but we want to confirm that we have been making progress and also to request your help at this time as well. This is a duty of this commission is to approve our draft plan before we send it to the National Park Service, which is a federal requirement for every state historic preservation office to have a statewide preservation plan, which is oftentimes an aspirational plan for others outside of state government. But what the plan ends up doing internally to us is it is then broken down into different folks' work plan across our division. So it has a functionality for us to guide our work individually and in the aggregate as a result for our entire office, as well as office of archaeology. So we started telling you about this last year. I think in one of my earlier reports in this cycle, I have told you what we've been up to. So we have completed the listening session, public engagement part of this, which we do every time we do one of these plans. And this year, because we've all gotten so used to Zoom, we did 12 Zoom listening sessions, and we put out a wide call following a public survey for people to participate in these. Frankly, I was a little disappointed that it wasn't as large of a group. I think people have a certain amount of survey and public engagement fatigue potentially. But that, on the other hand, though, made for some very lively discussions because it was a smaller group and people were able to say more than just one or two things. So we took that public feedback, and that's where this plan draft has come from. There's really 4 parts to any of these plans under the federal guidelines. One is we have to talk about what we did from the last plan. So I wrote that last spring, and it took me a while because I was gathering in a decade's worth of accomplishments. And we were able to do a whole lot. We couldn't have foreseen COVID. That did change in sort of the way that we went about things, and we had to strategize about how to still do our work in the midst of that as everyone else did. We always have a chapter specific to North Carolina history and the kinds of places that we have, how our state developed and what do we have to show for that, which every state, I will tell you, as you know, in your own travels, can be quite different from one another. So we have to tailor what we're trying to do to address what we have in our state's history. And then, of course, we have the public feedback section, which we go into a great deal. We had our own feedback sessions as well. And then we try to come up with goals and tasks that reflect what the public thought we needed to be working on, what we see we need to be working on, and what's feasible. And what's also aspirational too, because we're going to do this all again in 10 years' time. So the first request I would have of you is, I would appreciate if you would take some time to look at this and give us whatever feedback, editing feedback, you missed this feedback, whatever strikes you, we would appreciate that by October 15th, if possible. So that's about a month or so. And if you can send that directly to me, probably our lawyer would tell you you don't need to send that to everyone because that's probably not in keeping with our public meetings perspectives. But if you just send that to me, I would appreciate that.
What kind of feedback do you
Whatever
have?
strikes you that we're missing, or if you want to wordsmith, we'd appreciate that as well. I will say I wrote a goodly part of this because, well, I was involved in the whole thing. So I figured having one voice would probably be a good way to try to coalesce everything. But that's what, seeing it through my lens. So I'm very keen to hear your feedback. Did we get it right based on what you're reading? And did we miss any?
What was the date you wanted it back?
October 15th, if that's okay. Because I want to bring this back to you in final draft form at our district meeting. So that'll give us time to have Sheila, you heard Sheila and Carol mentioned, who is our great graphic designer. This is my effort at graphic design. I am not a graphic designer, but I did try to pick some photographs that help tell the story of what we're up to. So that's my effort, which is a poor effort. But in any case, I do want to, though, as in the way of an executive summary, give you some feedback as to what we did hear from the public. And this again was through a survey that we had, as well as the listening sessions. It ended up being the most valuable contribution of historic preservation was viewed to be maintaining a sense of place. We purposely did not define what sense of place meant, because that means a lot of different things in different places. But the next thing that came back as most valuable contribution was history education, which maybe is a segue to the next agenda item. And then the third was acknowledging everyone's history, which perhaps our last presentation helped demonstrate that we're very interested in having a holistic view of North Carolina history. Everyone's included, and then just things you never had potentially heard before, which I don't know, the naval history of North Carolina, that's one you don't hear a lot about, especially on the Union side. So just bigger picture for that. We also were keen to understand what services of ours as a state agency that our respondents had either used or found beneficial or had never heard of. But the number one, at 53%, almost over half, was our technical assistance work, which I always call the Preservation Extension Service. And that's largely our restoration services branch along the National Register and Survey Program, where people want to get some help on how to take care of their places. National Register nominations were done behind that, along with tax credits, and then the Certified Local Government Program and what we're doing with local preservation commissions was tied with, quote, public education. So again, this educational piece that we're trying to assist people. And I just want to say, as a reflection, I think a lot of people, when they hear a state historic preservation office, they think we're regulators, they think we're bureaucrats, but actually we're educators, I think, as much as we are anything else. We're very much geared towards trying to help individual constituents. And I will say, as part of people were allowed to give, open comments, we had people named specifically, I really appreciate X, I really appreciate Y, and named members of our staff. Future focus areas. And I think maybe we were giving some folks some ideas that we really would like to see forward, but digitizing our legacy data that's in paper in the basement that sometimes floods was our leading selection. And that was 87% of the respondents thought that we should do that. Followed also by, we would like more technical assistance and training and so forth. They were also very interested in our cemetery program. And some of the things that people gave us as open feedback was we really would like to see more high school and university level education and outreach, especially paid internships and collaboration with all of those levels of educators. And then one of the comments that gets to trades, who's going to take care of all these buildings, we have to have people trained to do that, was to partner with community colleges and existing construction programs to train more skilled craftspeople. So as a result of one of these listening sessions, we're waiting to hear back from them, but we've had preliminary discussions with Sand Hills Community College about how we can incorporate some historic preservation units within their trades program for construction training. So right now they're getting school started. So they told us it would be a little later in September. So we should be hearing from them soon. And hopefully I can give you more feedback on that next time. But in any case, I want to also just say that there seems to be the reflection of many constituents is North Carolina is a rapidly changing place. I think we all acknowledge that. We're very fortunate to have a very robust economy here. People, including myself, can't wait to get here. That's what I always tell people, because I was not born in North Carolina, but I do have a lot of North Carolina ancestry. But it's a state that's changing very quickly, which when people tell us the sense of place is something that they're very committed to trying to preserve in some way, that is so tied to the state's identity, personal identity, community identity. And it's really, in some ways, a source of orientation and social cohesion and a shared memory. Respect and pride probably comes into play as well. Excuse me, but there seem to be two North Carolinas, one that is very dynamic. Excuse me. All of the economic investment. Then there's another North Carolina, which seems to be one that has the opposite going on. Is there some?
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, I should have offered it, Parker.
But there's economic disinvestment for all sorts of reasons and beyond our ability to affect. But as a result, there's shrinking populations and shifting populations. And I'll just read this because I thought this really will help with the next discussion. Some members of the public worried that ignorance of a place's history, what is unknown or unrecognized, may lead to apathy and less appreciation for historic places. Loss of a sense of personal and community identity is seen as a threat to an equal sense of belonging, concepts that touch deeply on individuals' self-identity. This is really very fundamental, I think, to understanding why we're interested in history. It's very much about people. Development pressures were, again, ranked very high in all of our feedback. And people, though, acknowledge that not all development is bad development. The question is whether or not the development harmonizes with historic preservation efforts. And at the same time, if you have a building that's being used, it's more likely to survive. So there's that as well. Some of the places that it was a trio really, that we're either not preserving or not preserving well in the midst of this development issue. Farms and rural landscapes, which oftentimes are converted into some kind of development, residential or otherwise, cemeteries and burying grounds, and natural and scenic landscapes. But interesting, aside from those more specific venues, was something that they thought we weren't doing such a great job on was oral histories. And Dr. Waters and I have talked about this a lot as a thought that within our own department, we have an oral historian, but it's one person. And how do we create a cadre or a group of people at the local level? We were not going to be able to do all of this, but how do we help individual North Carolinians do that at a much more micro local level in their communities? Because that's the other thing is it's hard to understand why a place is significant if you don't have that personal story. You have to have that. You can make assumptions it's going to be paperwork somewhere. Despite what we heard about pension records as I worked earlier, that's just kind of luck as it would be. And then so what should we be doing about all of this? People can still remain very interested in our own outreach, training and expertise, and then an ability for us to partner with third parties. Often from some of this. Also are going to try to continue doing what we've been doing, but in a much more concentrated way, which is to focus on what we call niche constituencies. Realtor training, for example, is something that we want to get into this next cycle. We've worked with attorneys. I've myself done some continuing legal education with attorneys in the state through the Bar Association. We want to expand that beyond just that particular constituency. But we also are thinking about how do we build up the next generation of preservationists. I mean, I'm looking behind me. I've got snow on the roof, as my dad likes to tell me. And I think about the next generation coming behind us, which I think is something that this commission can certainly help with in terms of advocacy for salaries that allow someone to live in a high cost of living area such as this. Because I do worry about staff capacity. And so we cannot expand our programs if we don't have the staff to work with the public. We're not making widgets. So we have to have people to work with people. And so either we're going to take on expand programs that only if we're properly resourced, or we're going to have to reorient what we're doing very strategically is my concept about this. But again, the takeaway is the public would like us to continue to engage with them as broadly and as helpfully as possible. So I commend to you, especially the final section, which is it's this, the next decade. It starts on page 86. Go through the goals and some objectives that we think are feasible. We don't want to be so high in the sky that we can't accomplish things. But we also want others to be inspired to take on some of this themselves, such as Preservation North Carolina and some of the regional and local nonprofits and local commissions. So it's for anybody that has an interest in preservation, what they might be able to do. And there's also a piece about resiliency in here, which is why on the page, the front page, you'll see the elevation of one of the Nags Head cottages. It was done as a tax credit project, so that will survive for another however long it can survive. So that's just a little teaser. And again, I appreciate ahead of time all of you reading what's a little bit of a lengthy document, but there was a lot to give you feedback.
I enjoyed looking at the pictures, trying to figure out where everything was.
Is it?
No, go ahead.
Okay,
Yes,
I was really taken by this and I read it online and I need to print it out and read it like you did. But there were two things that came out to me was about the Cherokee. I didn't see anything or much about the Cherokee.
We made some invitations and we also invited the Indian Heritage Commission, which declined to participate with us. I was disappointed at that our American Heritage Commission did. So we would be glad to follow up some more.
I'm kind of ignorant, I'm ashamed to say, but is your land in Cherokee national land? Is it?
It's held in trust, yeah, from the federal government. So, yeah.
I just think we ought to have.
I think it's no secret. I mean, I'll just speak freely. I think there's some hesitation probably on the side from the Eastern Band perspective. Because I think of all the things that, and I hate to speak for all of us, so let me just say that. But that sovereignty is one of those things that as citizens of a nation, that we feel pretty strongly about. And so what politically is going on with other folks who I guess claim ancestry, native ancestry is makes it difficult to come together to sort of participate in a way that folks might hope we would, if that makes sense.
I just don't want to leave.
The issue is, yeah, and I think the solution, we've talked a lot about it and thinking about as sort of a federally recognized tribe that it makes sense to do kind of one-on-one conversations, that, and I'm happy to do that for sure. Being asked to sit on the same commission as other folks has been sort of the issue when we're the only federally recognized tribe in North Carolina. And so we have different needs and different expectations, I think, that come with that versus sitting on a commission.
And if you don't mind me saying too, is that federally recognized tribes can have, and do have in the case of the Eastern Band and the other Cherokee in Oklahoma, do all have tribal historic preservation officers who are our counterparts.
Yes.
Again, because the sovereignty issue, and they, the thing is, I wouldn't presume to write a plan for
them. Yeah, I think
so that's part of, I guess, is in way of an explanation as well.
Yes, that's a good point. So I think I didn't get into the relationships part, but I saw that there was one. And so if if it's not mentioned, it probably would be worth mentioning that y'all work with our TIFO all the time. And but I'll keep an eye out as I review it. But yeah, I think just that sovereignty piece is the one where I'm always gonna advocate for, just making sure that we're given that one-on-one conversation.
And
ability.
And one other thing, if you don't mind me saying, is whereas the Eastern Band are still resident in North Carolina. There are other Native American groups, Indian groups. that-
Yeah, we just
tribes,
talked about
whether
the
you guys
Tuscarora.
tribes.
Yeah.
Right.
So if you look, there's a resource, I give it out every time I do a talk. But there's a HUD resource, yeah, TDAT, TDAT, TDAT.
That's right.
And if you go there, you can put in your home address. And you could see like who are the tribal entities that have an ancestral claim to the land that your house is on, for example, or what by county, all over the United States. And so you would see the Tuscarora on the east side of the state listed, and they do exist as a federally recognized tribe in New York.
That's right.
Because we were talking about that earlier, because they were central to the division of North Carolina and South Carolina,
That's
of
right.
what was going on at the time the states were divided.
And the Catawba.
And the Catawba,
Yeah.
And we also hear from the Muskogee Creek occasionally as well.
Lumbee aren't federally recognized.
They aren't federally recognized.
And so
The Algonquin,
yeah, the federally recognized tribes do though have the ability to set up a tribal historic preservation office, and I think there's somewhere in the range of 600 in the country, something like that.
It's crazy.
So
There's 574 federally recognized tribes, and we hosted NAPO, gosh, last year, 2 years ago? Yeah, which was super fun to sort of see all the tribal historic preservation officers come together and have conversation.
So again, I hope that helps a little bit. It was not a purposeful exclusion by any means.
Yeah.
We're looking, but again, I would presume to set up
Like-
plans for the Cherokee.
Yeah, and I think figuring out a way to navigate, the politics, it's crazy. I mean, I have lots of colleagues who are in the museum world, and we work together, and it's all good, but like when my chief says that we're not sending a representative, then we're not. So like, that's just, it is what it is for me as far as that goes.
Well, I just wanted to mention, and the other thing I wanted to mention is, I think that you guys are just doing a phenomenal job coming into the America 250. And I noticed that was mentioned in there, but I mean, we can kick that up because, that's to me, that's something that everybody can get excited about.
Sure.
Not our whole country, our state, our community, our schools. It's really, just a big deal.
Well, we do America 250 every day. Hard work, to be honest. And
You do.
the other thing is, this, by the time I put 25, because that will be the first year this will be in place, but it's a 10-year plan.
Yeah.
So that's part of why I guess we didn't concentrate on that. One is we already are doing those kind of activities. We're just kind of highlighting them this year as part of the anniversary of the country's founding, but we're trying to do all those things. But I think it's a great feedback.
I just think it's so exciting. I think it's like the candy you're holding over them to get excited. Look at this. This is a big deal. Okay.
Sure.
Ramona, I was particularly struck by your comment that oral histories were at the top of the mountaintop of feedback, and that's my personal passion. And in all due respect to Dr. Denard's profession, that's a foot in the out there today. Is I don't need intellectuals telling me what history is. I want to experience it and I think oral histories democratize people's understanding of history in a way that we need right now to give some latitude to different perspectives. And me, it has nothing to do with politics. It's the reality of people have different stories to tell. And you don't need a public official or even frankly, a college professor to tell someone what that history should be from their perspective. I believe full well we'll move beyond this era where that skepticism, which is very unhealthy, that we're presuming that someone just because they've got a PhD is biased inherently in their interpretation of history, but one way or the other. But I do think the oral histories and the fact that there's such a dearth of resources to glean and gather oral histories. Noah's not here today because of his illness, and we're going to have to basically postpone the next time on the agenda until the December meeting around our committee. But I would be very disappointed if that isn't a priority of this committee. And I'm talking to a couple of you that are on the committee right here. But my point there is, I feel so strongly that that's a great way to pursue breaking through some of this question that always is there. Well, history depends on who writes it or who talks about it. And I dismiss it because of that.
Okay. Now, should you try to make a distinction between history and stories? For example, we've been working on narrative down at Tryon Palace, and we said that, you know, there are many stories, but one history. We've been trying to cobble from those many stories one history of the folk in that area.
I certainly.
So now that's where I guess the student of history, the expert comes in to pull fragments from these many stories.
No question.
To see if you can find some common denominators, you know, because this is what you get bogged down within families, you know, like the Hatfields and McCoys, you know. You don't have anyone to pull a common denominator there. And so this one is saying, well, my daddy, you know, told me this and that's the way it's going to be. Or this is the way we prepare this dish, you know, from my grandmother, and that's the way it's going to be, and all of that, you know. Yeah. So from the many, one, you know, you got to pull something together. And that's where oral history is good, you know, when you can use it as a point of departure, you know, to work that dough together, you know, and you know, create, you know.
Well, I completely agree with you, Dr. Denard. I was a history major in college. I knew that was the discipline that history had to impose on all these stories. That is certainly not my point. My point is largely around, there's something skeptical in the broader public about who is telling me what history is these days. And unfortunately, and very tragically, it's tied to political commentary or political biases.
We're at a bad place now.
We're at a bad place. So my point there is break through this reluctance for people to feel that their opinions or their stories don't have a place at the table. But I 100% agree with you. At some point, you have to impose a discipline around. But that's the point I'm saying earlier about democratizing input around history. But that's just obviously my passion on some of the initiatives we need to really focus on, and I'm just so delighted that did show up in the survey. So
No, likewise, and I think everybody in the room probably has done some level of genealogy research themselves, whatever. And it's always striking to me how somebody, it's almost like it's a toss of the coin. What dossier can be created, if you will, about you or me, based on what I wrote down or what, you know, what court record I had, or how often I paid my water bill, or did I apply for a pension? It's kind of the luck of the draw a certain amount. And this is, I think, a proactive way to make sure that you have a fuller understanding of that person, that time. Y'all were talking in the break about, you know, recollections about small towns in the 60s and all. It's almost like stardust. It can just evaporate unless you have it recorded somewhere, somehow. And people don't write letters anymore. There's that as a recollection. And I want to say, Carly is a young person who can read cursive handwriting. I just wanted to bring that up. That's something we have to advertise for now. We have to put that in the job description. Can you read cursive, not even necessarily historic, but cursive handwriting?
Wow.
And that's, we laugh, but this is how the world is changing.
yeah, exactly. Hadn't even thought of that.
So how do we capture the essence of who we are if the only records you have is something that's in a social media company's database about you? I don't know. There's a lot of philosophical questions around all of this, but oral histories, I think, are something that we, as a department, Dr. Waters, and you heard me talk about this as part of A250. My hope was that we could gin up some of that, but maybe yet we can, but I think that needs to be done on a big WPA era kind of level. You remember that? That was done kind of as a make work thing, but I'm saying that's something that we have to capture that now.
And the department has made a commitment through some resources to fund another oral historian to work with the current one on some of their 250. So it's one of them. So
We have to give people the tools to do it at the local level. That's my belief. We have to create a network of people who know how to do this at local level and a place to store the stories once we get them.
Ramona, you had something in your report here on these May Highway Historical Marker approvals.
What page is that?
This is on page 8. No,
Is this-
page 6. No, it's page 8. I'm sorry.
Page 8.
Page 8, yes. The Plymouth Massacre, Plymouth,
Oh, yes.
because
Yes.
that's where we came into conflict, you know, with
Yes.
some folk who, with this contested memory.
Yes.
Or contested definitions of history and all of that. And we worked through that in some way, David. But would you, okay, would you comment a little on that as to how we, because when I first became aware of it, we had not worked through it then, you know, okay? I was there for the celebration of that Plymouth anniversary of the massacre, you know,
Yeah.
and that's when I became aware from the mayor talking about, you know, there was some conflict in a certain segment of the community.
Well, I think my esteemed colleague talked about one that's a big one in her world, which is the Mecklenburg Declaration. Did it exist? Did it not exist? What did it mean? If it existed, all of that. I think a similar question here is the events that happened in Plymouth in 1864. There were killings. What was that? What was that all about? Was it just regular combat or was it something much more sinister?
And if you call it a massacre at some point, that would put a stain on one group of folk that they didn't want to, you know, have placed on them. you know.
Well, and the identity of the town too. You know, the highway marker up, that is something that oftentimes is celebrated, but maybe it's more of a commemoration versus a celebration. So as I recollect, as with most all of our markers, it is a grassroots effort. Someone comes up with a proposal, they come to us on the committee, or the committee, which is comprised of these history professors. And they look at it and weigh out the historiography of it. And there have been articles written about, so what actually did happen? And it looked at oral histories, many of which were in naval pension records. It's amazing what's shown in the Navy today. And that was part of, you know, what is sifting out what's true, you know?
What you can prove, because
What
with
you can prove.
the state historic marker, you have to prove statewide significance. And that is the hardest of the 5 things to do.
That's correct. And so figuring out what it actually was or was not was, I think, the first level of inquiry. And then the next level of inquiry, always for the highway marker program, is, so what do we say about it in a pithy, accurate, statewide significance being incorporated into something you can read as you pass by at 45 miles an hour or faster, depending on where you are, which is very unlike other states where they're gonna have it all. Read. Nobody ever reads them,
No.
whereas ours get read, of course. But what ended up happening though was after we went through our regular steps, we had a public meeting in town and people came and this was what we settled upon. Dr. Waters was very involved as was the secretary, who has to approve the final draft language. So that's how it came out. But again, there was that public engagement.
I thought at one time there may be an unfolding of another massacre. Be contested groups there.
Difficult history is hard to talk about. I think we'll all acknowledge, but again, it goes back to the oral histories. Had there not been some statements made contemporaneously and then later on recollections, it's hard to sift out. What is it? What can you prove is one way or the other.
When I'm looking at that, I think about that. I'm in a very difficult position right now because we're celebrating the 250th. In Currituck County, the biggest thing that happened during the American Revolution was a ride from the beach across the Sound all the way through 4 counties to get the soldiers to go to the Battle of Great Bridge. Now, that shows up in documents in 1800, but I cannot prove that there was a lady by the name of Betsy Dowdy. I can't prove that she actually rode across the Sound, but yet I know that General Skinner went to the Battle of Great Bridge because somebody told him he needs to go. And so, and when you're talking about markers and celebrations, how do you balance, the two? And that is very difficult when people want to do gigantic things about that particular event. And they look at me and ask me to explain it historically. And I just look at them and say, I can tell you it was written by General Skinner's grandson in 1800 in a book, but that is not proof that it actually happened.
Sure.
And and Betsy Dowdy didn't get captured like Paul Revere did. So. History is difficult.
And this may not be appropriate for this setting, but just, and I've noticed a lot that you talked a lot about collaboration and the need for collaboration in the report. And so I wonder, do you know what the Battlefield Trust does with the with the buildings on the property that they buy?
Yes.
I mean, what do they do with it?
Well, it depends on who buys it and what they plan on doing with it. In our state, you're talking about the American Battlefield Trust.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if, I mean, with these huge purchases of farmland, if we're trying to restore or have some kind of,
Well,
focus on rural life and what rural life was like. And then I understand they don't want to have a country store right in the middle of, the Union's second line of defense at Bentonville or whatever. But at the same time, that acres and acres and acres of property don't need to look exactly like well, that's just my opinion, but how could we perhaps rescue some of those buildings or barns and those kinds of things and use them ourselves?
Michelle and I might tag team this answer, if that's okay, but just technique wise, I can speak to that, and then maybe Michelle turn over to sort of what bigger visions are. We recognize, and it's not just Bentonville, let's say, American Battlefield Trust oftentimes will come in and start working with owners of property because they can work more nimbly than the state. And they will get a contract together. They will then come to us and we will apply as an agency for the National Park Service battlefield money. There's too much battlefield lingo here, but bear with me. And so that's the American Battlefield program at the National Park Service. American Battlefield Trust used to be the Civil War Trust, but they expanded their scope of interest. And we will ultimately end up having the land donated by the Battlefield Trust. They have part of the match. The feds through us have the other part of the match. It's a little bit of a turnkey thing. But I don't think we like to buy land with buildings on them because unless you have purpose for building, what's going to become of it? So if it's a residence, we now like to try to cut the residence out and just take the acreage, the raw acreage behind it, recognizing there is a community around the Bentonville battlefield. And that things kept happening after 1865 too. But there have been some cases where there were some tobacco barns and things like that that have been removed over time just because it become a liability to the state. People, being there and don't need to be there and they're falling down, that kind of thing. So there have been some removed, and that went through this group as well as the state property office, and as I recall years ago. But I think bigger picture, we just got a grant, which is in here to sort of help plan around what the restoration needs are. But Michelle, maybe you can speak more to the vision out there. I'll just, if you'd like to come out.
Oh, sure.
I'd be happy to. I can share the podium with you.
Thanks.
This is one of my favorite things, actually. conserving land, that holds really powerful historic narratives is just such a phenomenal win-win for so many of us. I will tell you that each specific plot of land or, conservation preservation project is so distinct. We are very surgical about it. And so rather than going in and saying, this is the way we do things and we're gonna come in, really aggressive, we really try to not do that. We try to go in, have a relationship with all of the stakeholders, understand what the structures are, how they could potentially be used for something else, if that's something. For instance, there is one building that we did acquire as a part of one of our acquisitions that we were able to use as office space for Bentonville because of how vast that battlefield is. We needed another office space for folks to be able to gather. Certainly if it's something that could hurt people or, harm our visitors or our staff, and we need to, dismantle it, and then we document it very carefully. And we make sure that any descendants who might be involved, that they're well aware. I love to come up with creative solutions where, for instance, if there's a way that, as Ramona described, cutting around a property so that we still have people living in those communities right there in their ancestral homes. You cannot invest in community any better way than saying, let us preserve this property and will you partner with us to be our eyes and ears? It's really a great, project, which is why I think Bentonville is considered to be one of the ground
It's
jewels.
considered a model for this kind of preservation effort. And people, like you say, come to us, Michelle,
Yeah.
wanting this, and a lot of times it's farmers who are looking to retire. Right, and that's their 401k tied up in the land. And
So we start with a posture of listening.
that's right.
And we always, if we can figure out a way how to either use the building or allow the building to continue to be inhabited by family, we will always do that first because the history doesn't get made without the people.
Right.
And the history can't preserve without, good relationships. So we start there.
And it's part of the story
Absolutely.
that people still live there.
That's right. Yeah.
And who were they and
That's right.
what did they think about where they were living and all that?
That's what we're up to at Bentonville. We are not about erasure. We're not about coming in to try to make something pristine.
And especially in a rural community
Yeah.
where, people's roots are often so deep and they tell stories that, your grandfather told you something in 1937 and you tell your child in 1967. And, those stories that they may or may not be true, but they're still part of they tell you about the.
If I may, we just dedicated, it's been maybe about a year, a space that was a part of one of the Bentonville plots for the Flowers family, where they actually have people buried
Yeah,
there.
they still have the right to bury. But I will say, just to wrap up, is.
Sure, I just wondered if we're trying to preserve some sense of what rural America is like, that just seemed to me like people are selling their farms.
Right.
Because they want the money, can't we capture some of that?
Well, there's one other little kind of gloss on this is, one is the land has been rented back to other farmers to continue to farm. So that we have a rental situation going on there, which presumably will go on forever. The other thing is there was an incident, if you want to call it that, in Franklin, Tennessee, years ago now, where the Battle of Franklin, you've ever been to Franklin, Tennessee, it's now a pretty nice suburb of Nashville. And so where the battle lines were is now their neighborhood's been built, like in Fredericksburg. If you walk around, you're like, where's the battlefield? Well, it's underneath all those Victorian houses. Well, it's underneath all those Victorian houses that are between the hill and the river. You're like, well, where's the battlefield? So the same thing had happened in Franklin, and the American Battlefield Trust and the Civil War Trust bought an area that included a Pizza Hut and bungalows and so forth, and came in and demolished, which there was a lot of outcry. These were perfectly good houses, kind of thing, and older houses, because there was another layer of history that could happen in the meantime. So that then brought about a new emphasis on the Section 106 process for any federal funding under the National Historic Preservation Act, which is a whole other part of our department to say, you're gonna acquire land, you need to find out, is anything there historic? Is it eligible for the register or listed on the register by itself, not associated with battlefield? And then you go through that kind of inquiry to figure out, well, what do you do? So there's not a casual approach to it. I hope that helps too.
Yes.
And that comes into play, but they recently, it just, because I end up doing a lot of battlefield work, and I'm sorry, Chair Ruffin, this is off.
No, this is fascinating.
But a good discussion, at Fredericksburg in Virginia, because I usually park my car there to go into DC, because I don't like to drive to DC. I'll park the car there and train into DC. So I've spent a lot of time in Fredericksburg. There's an area that they saved from warehouse development, which was the slaughter pen farm, which was a huge, another part of the battlefield you don't hear as much about. And there was a Victorian house there. And so they just, as my understanding, they dismantled the house and moved it elsewhere, and then removed much more modern barns and that kind of thing. So the last time I was there, the house was still there, but it was about to be moved, to be replaced, or be placed somewhere else rather than lost. But anyway, there are like 5 medals of honor earned in that one field, from what I understand. And it's a pretty important place in American history, period. But there's a tension between where do we drop the needle on the time period we're trying to interpret. And I think that's something Michelle and I, we expand the story, but how do you do that? And, you know, people aren't aliens that dropped in from the planet not understanding that. So I think people have that question oftentimes, and hopefully able to explain it to them.
I appreciate that very much.
Are there any other questions? Yes.
The exciting thing I see in all of this stuff is that you must first acknowledge the people, that they exist in whatever story. They may seem weird to you, but you have to acknowledge them before you can get them to move. In other words, what we say in the streets is meet folk where they are. You have to meet them where they are. And then you can work with them.
Right. And hopefully that's the tone of what you're reading in the draft that I've given to you. Are there any other questions?
Me for having you to pull something like that out. That's big.
You eat an elephant one spoonful of time.
Remind me how often the survey, when was the last survey?
So like 10 years ago, or?
Yeah, okay, so 10 years ago.
It's every 10 years.
Every 10 years,
You
got
can
it.
do 5, but we found 5 is by the time you finish one, you're planning for the next one, and you don't have time to do that.
And we can break.
And each plan is 10 years, yeah?
10 years, yes.
Okay.
It's so long time. Yeah, others like.
Okay.
So one of the things that I was just talking to Dr. Waters about, in the interest of time, you know, we do have the museum tour schedule. Is that if anybody does not object, we will have some of the director's reports through lunch. Obviously, take a break to let you all.
Just lunch is here.
And lunch is here. And the issue there was, if they hadn't been here, we were going to say, well, maybe you stay and then do your report now, but that's
You're going to break now and get lunch.
Since lunch is here, then maybe this is a good time to break, and then we'll.
Walmart has done something to
I
me.
have a driver going to come pick me up, my sister-in-law. What time should I tell her? I told her 12:30, but what time? We're gonna have lunch and then have the museum tour, is that right? So what are you thinking? Maybe 2:30?
Because they're ready, they're gonna be ready for you all. But I'll let John, if we're done earlier, we'll get over to the museum earlier, but John Campbell is gonna lead the tour over there. And we had said 1:30.
Yeah, and we are not going to, we're going to skip over the NOAA committee.
Right,
Because
right.
he's not here. There's no need to speculate on that at this
So we're
point.
gonna have lunch and then a tour. Okay.
Just a couple of other announcements at the end, and that's
Okay,
it.
okay.
So we will adjourn maybe for 10 minutes to get your lunch, and then we'll reconvene in here, and then I'll ask Dr. Waters to bring director's reports.
And then I guess that's
deputy underwater is now being advertised, and that person needs to be a diver, so that limits the pool, pun intended. And then Reed Thomas, many of you know him, he's restoration specialist, long serving. He's now been promoted to Eastern Office Supervisor, so his old job is out. So I mentioned this by way of saying, just the way the state government works is when you do have a vacancy, you end up doing your old job and your new job simultaneously, which is not always great. So we also are still looking for potential of having two positions. The governor's budget has included twice now, environmental review specialist Renee Gledhill early stopped by just a moment ago. And that would be helping with our infrastructure oversight, as well as a full-time NAGPRO specialist. So legislature has not taken up either of those positions, although I hear there is growing interest in the NAGPRO position. So that's good news. We'll see about that. This is just by way of more Americans. And others are very interested in that. I think this will be a legacy, just by coincidence. The Southern campaigns of the Revolutionary War National Heritage Corridor was set up 2 years ago by Congress, but they've gotten very little money for any operational funds. So that administrative responsibility has been assigned to the University of South Carolina. And so they have pooled that money over 2 years, and they're now going to try to get somebody to work on what is the required management plan, congressionally mandated management plan, which will be due 3 years after after the corridor is established, which means 2026. And so that follows all of the different routes of all the various Army movements within both South Carolina and North Carolina. And I can get you some more information about what that map looks like. But I think that'll be an opportunity to tell again a holistic story about what that was all about. And again, be a legacy so that when the 2026 commemoration is over, there will be a vehicle to continue telling those stories. We already talked about the preservation plan. So for that, we've had a good discussion there. The next National Register meeting is going to be in October. And Mr. Reynolds will be joining the NRAC. Dr. Waters is also named a professor from NC Central to also serve. We had some vacancies, term limited. And then Sean Patch, who is an archaeologist in private practice, he's going to be our new chair.
What's the day of that? Is that a bifurcated meeting again?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. We're having so much fun here about
Yeah.
We're gonna do it twice. So October 10th is the actual nominations, National Register nominations meeting. But we have so many countywide surveys that have been completed 2 weeks after the next two. So that'll be what, the 24th, if my math's right.
Okay.
And that'll be a morning virtual meeting. We have been helping, as we like to help our friends in historic sites. We got $100,000 planning grant for National Park Service to help with restoration guidance. Sort of what's the plan for restoring the battlefield? What was woods is now fields and vice versa. Unlike other battlefields, that one was not photographed at the end of the battle. That's why Gettysburg is one of these freeze-frame place, because they know exactly what it looked like in many places. We're photographing it within a week of the battle, like Ross Antietam. We also have our certified local government grants that have gone out, and those are the seed projects you've heard me talk about, but I did want to tell you some of the projects. We have 2 National Register nominations, both for African-American residential neighborhoods, the Broad Elk community in Fayetteville, and which had gotten a survey grant before. And Emory Wood Estates in Durham. We're going to do some window workshops in Greenville. We're going to do a cemetery GPR project in Wake Forest, which, you know, we've done that in several other places, and mayors left us, but we did that in Lexington as well. And we're going to do some educational events in Asheville and an African American history project in Waxhaw, which will include oral histories, I understand. So we're trying to incorporate that in some of our grant programs. Albemarle is our latest certified local government. I believe that's number 57 in the state, meaning they are now eligible to get some of this grant dollars. I also want to point out to you, the statewide historic resiliency project is having another round of workshops. If anybody's interested in attending those, I can get that information to you. That was one of our hurricane grant funded projects. We already talked about children's books. I will tell you though, we are having now more like $500,000 repair renovation project with the Upper House, which has had a lot of accumulated needs, roofing, painting, et cetera. So that's getting underway right now as we speak. And I'll let you read about what's going on in archaeology, but I do want to say these surveys that we've done in collaboration with state parks oftentimes and wildlife resources to learn about new places on the coast that are threatened by things like what's happening right now with the storms. Those have been very, very great. And we're going to be having more outreach about those, including at professional conferences. But that includes identifying some new sites, Native American sites we didn't know about. We suspected we didn't know about on some of the islands down below in Rhode Island, and also some cemeteries. So we have some more support from them, hopefully. So there's a lot going on, but that'll give you a little bit of a flavor, and then that's glad to answer your questions.
You have some lunch.
All right.
So we are juggling in real time. We have a lot of wonderful things happening, but in this very moment, we're most concerned about our historic resources down in Brunswick County and New Brunswick County. So I just shared an updated message with Dr. Waters that I don't think everyone heard me say, so I'll just share it with you. Chuck LeCarrot. He said that the stockade at Fort Fisher has fallen over. At least one tree is down. Our earthworks are eroding badly, and the parking lot is still flooded. And the Wharton Causeway, Gateway, which means that there's no real safe access to Brunswick County to Anderson. But this is the update just from a few moments ago. And so it will potentially Brunswick Town Fort Anderson may have to be closed for a significant amount until that causeway is rebuilt. So, as I mentioned also earlier, we have our historic site summit that's in progress. So I will be rejoining them as soon as I take your leave with your blessing. I'm sure I'll be going into emergency response mode with our team. But I will tell you that we are still celebrating a lot of phenomenal news. Last year, we served over 1.6 million visitors. It's slightly down, which we anticipated because of the generosity of this administration and the leadership of the department and a lot of amazing stakeholder advocacy. We've had this kind of amazing growth spurt moment, an unprecedented time of growth and change. New visitor centers, new staff positions. We have a new PIO who we just announced today. You all may recall the name Tara Schramm as being the lead over at the state capitol. She's taking on our public information officer position. We just announced that today. We have over 30 million hits online on our website. And we've broken several other records. The largest private gift to a historic site in the history of the division, $2.5 million from the Duke Endowment that came as a commemoration of their centennial. And we definitely have Dr. Waters to thank for opening the doors for that gift to be possible.
Whoa.
Yes.
Michelle. Michelle.
Yes.
They need to, everyone needs to understand too, that Michelle's team really cultivated that ground. And so there's, I guess, credit to be spread around that's your vision for that enormous gift to
It was 2 years in the making. We went back and forth with them for quite a while over different possibilities. And so the 2.5 million will be a transformative gift, as you can imagine, to help completely reimagine the exhibit. If you haven't seen the Duke Homestead exhibit in the past 5 to 8 years, if you want to see something that needs a lot of love, that's an example. It does not reflect our best practices, and it hasn't in a very long time. So it's to update that. It's also to create an endowment for the preservation of the actual Duke Homestead, the house itself, where the Duke story begins. And we are going to be working with them, also thanks to Dr. Waters, on supporting a traveling exhibit about the history of the endowment. We have a few cool personnel changes that I want to share. We have a new assistant site manager named Adara Blunt, who is joining Historic Stagville. And we also have a new interpreter at James K. Polk, which we also just spoke of earlier. My colleague Ramona spoke about the $100,000 grant for Bentonville Battlefield. Another $2.5 million for Fort Anderson, and the wave attenuator effort, which we do work collaboratively with Ramona's team, another 1,000 linear feet. It's moments like this that we are very grateful for the technology of these wave attenuators to help prevent the erosion of really important shoreline. We were losing not only historic landscape and flora and fauna being impacted, but there were artifacts that were washing up and away. And so we're very proud of that project and the partnership. We have the priority updates to state history that we're so proud of being a part of as a signature project of Secretary Wilson and Deputy Secretary Waters. So Aycock Birthplace, Bentonville Battlefield, Bennett Place, Vance Birthplace, historic Edenton and Town Creek Indian Mound are all going through overhauls, and we're bringing in new technology and interactive uses for some of the digital humanities advances that have come to the fore. We also just want to shout out some educator focused initiatives. I know our K through 12 educators are so much on all of our minds. Another initiative of the department is Learning Happens Here. This is why Christine Norris has joined us. Really proud that the North Carolina Transportation Museum was one of the first museums to work with Christy to host educators. And so they came from 22 different schools across the state. And I also just want to share with you that last year we served over 280,000 youth in person. So that doesn't count online. How many K-12 educators, homeschoolers, and parents who are historical minded use our resources. So these numbers are something that make us very proud. We do have you'll notice a 4% decrease in visitation from last year. We were over 1.7 million last fiscal year. We're at just over 1.6 million. It's still a phenomenal number. We anticipate that number will probably flag up and down for the next few years because of the necessary closures of our facilities for the expansion of these new visitor centers that we are getting in places like Somerset, House on the Horseshoe, Fort Dobbs, and Stagville, and of course, Fort Fisher. So when you close down a place like Fort Fisher for demolishment of the old visitor center, in order to build the new one, that's going to show up in our numbers. And so these growth spurts are creating some growing pains. We are noticing some stress and fatigue among our staff, which is why the summit is so important. First, express our gratitude, have a little levity, have some peer learning, and opportunity for us to show them how much we appreciate them. We are working to create new and innovative ways to retain them. So more of our staff are participating in national conferences. We had 7 members of historic sites represent at the Association for State and Local History Conference in Mobile, Alabama, presenting on panels, and also participating in some professional development. So those are some of the retention techniques that we're using to try to mitigate against this burnout that we do see kind of, bubbling to the surface. So we've broken a lot of records with the support of Dr. Waters and Secretary Wilson. We have never seen this kind of moment for preserving the history and memory of North Carolina. And it's a lot, but we are exhilarated. Happy to answer the questions.
I want to thank Michelle. I'm back out again, kind of getting to our sites. I was the secretary and I were with the team yesterday at the summit. And I just want to say, if you haven't had a chance, you go to the sites. I mean, Charlotte Hawkins Brown is a case in point. I mean, Michelle and her team have done remarkable work with very limited resources. And that site, just in how the grounds look and the waysides that are there, it has been completely transformed in according to Michelle's vision for what you wanted to see happen there. So my most recent visit there was impressive. The only thing that I was disappointed in is that one of my former students who's been there for a long time, as the assistant manager, she was leaving to take a job at UNC Greensboro. But she was kind of feeling that burnout as well. She, Liz told me that, but she's going to stay engaged there. But just how the site looked, I stopped at Fort Dobbs last Friday on my way out to Asheville. And even there, I mean, just looking at what they have done, how they're interacting with the public, what is to come, they're going to get a new visitor center that's coming as well. It's remarkable to see how things have changed just in the short time that I've been in the department. In Michelle's division, we're doing this priority updates to state history across the department, but Michelle's division has had to carry the ball on that more than other divisions have. And they have done it very gracefully. I want to thank the secretary is not here right now, but he has really put, I guess the best way to say it is to put the money where his mouth is. And he said, what is needed there? He's using department resources to make sure that division is getting what it needs to really do these updates on where we really touch the public. So I just want to thank Michelle and her team for what they're doing. I think you'll be proud if you get out and you go see what's happening at the sites.
I will pass that commendation on. If you would forgive me, I think I need to reunite with my team because
keep them in mind. I think we just announced something recently in business where we gave people unlimited PTO, personal time off, and that really sent a massive statement about people care for your staff, particularly when you've been on a success trajectory. Sometimes bystanders take things for granted, right? That they can just keep going, and keep your staff in mind because you don't need burnout.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, and you didn't read Brad, our interim director for the museum, is not here today. You have his report there. We're going to go over to the museum to do a walkthrough, but Brad is with the curatorial and collections team today because the Lucy creative team is in from California. I was there to kick off that meeting earlier this morning. It's a large group of people with, the construction team. Everyone is there to begin the process of thinking through the development of the new exhibits for the museum, which is really, Shana, I'm learning a grueling process. So
we can wrap very quickly. I'm going to combine basically two items, other business and chair announcements. If anybody has other business, speak up now. Not hearing any. I'd like, in terms of chair announcements, the next meeting is scheduled for the 11th of December. It is scheduled to be virtual or remote. One of the things I wanted to frankly have a discussion about, and we can do this post this current meeting, is get feedback on whether or not we ditch the alternative virtual versus in-person. And in the context of thinking through that, it's not a binary that it has to be in raw. it would be frankly a good thing to, if we could move this around the state geographically. I don't think there's any question in my mind. I'm expressing a distinct bias. The quality of our discussion today is enhanced by in-person. You're not going to get that in a virtual Zoom call. It just never will happen. So my point there is, maybe, and Parker, you're excellent at this. If you could find a way to do some kind of polling of the membership of the commission to just kind of get some feedback about whether, if you feel like we could move off this kind of bifurcated every other meeting. And not only that, this is something Dr. Waters and I talked about, and you suggested, even the possibility next year, looking at potentially a retreat of the commission that would be, an overnight or something that would be really an added dimension, certainly since I've been here. And I would, so nothing to be decided today, but I think that would be something we'd love your feedback on in the next 30 days. Because that's certainly something I'm not, it doesn't have to be here in Raleigh. We can move it around. But I admit to the bias of being, preferring the in-person meetings, frankly. So any other issues? We will, again, thank you so much for the invite to take us over to the latter stages of the current museums being around. And if not, I entertain a motion for adjournment.
One last thing for the record. Thank you to Parker.
As always. Parker, as we, in an obligatory way, have to come sign documents. Make sure that the Millie Barbie is edited so I can sign that.
Okay, if you want to come back and do that today, that'd be great. I've got a big pile of deaccession forms in my office.
I can do that easily.
Okay.
It's History Museum. Yeah, I'll be glad to. All right, any motion for adjournment?
I make a motion.
No, you all rushed that. Commissioner Snowden and Commissioner Phillips in succession have moved. All in favor? All opposed? It's carried. Thank you so much. And you safe travels back.
Okay, I'm not going to go with you because I would slow you down walking. So, and I've been here long enough that I've gone through the tour a couple of times.
Yeah. Okay.
I want to hear what they're thinking about. What's gonna
How they're going to pack up,
I don't want to hear about that. I have enough of that kind of stuff.